Okay, so in this video I'm going to show you how to make one of these masks with a clear panel, either for lip reading or just to be able to see smiles. It'd be really good for when you work with kids. So what you need to do is to have your two pieces of fabric. I've got quite a thick jersey here, so I'm just using two pieces, but you could also use an additional layer of mesh in there if you wanted to. And then I've got my clear little window here. All of this is part of the pattern. And then I've got some elastic, which is about 11 centimeters long. Two pieces of that for either side. Okay, so what you want to do first of all is to get one of your pieces of your mask. And when we're sewing, we always sew inside out. We want to get bits of elastic and then just start placing them on one piece first of all. Flatten your pin as much as you can. It can be quite tricky once you've turned this around, making sure you don't twist your elastic around. So you want to just pop it like that. Pin that in place just to keep it there. And then we want to do the same on the other side. We're going to have one here. And if you notice, there's about 1 centimetre distance here, and this is flush with the edge of your fabric there. The 1 centimetre is going to be your seam allowance. And the seam allowance is also included on the pattern. And that's that. Now turn it the correct way. So you'll see that there's a slight more of a point here. So just check that if you've got a patterned fabric like this, just to make sure that you're not going to end up with your print upside down. There's not really that much difference in it anyway. And then you're going to get your other piece and you're going to place that on top. And we're going to do a bit of a bagging technique where we sew all the way around the edge, just leaving one small gap of about 5 centimeters or a couple of inches, whatever you work in. So I'm just going to make sure that most of my fabric is now pinned, all my edges together. The great thing with working with jersey is that when you place your fabrics together, it doesn't tend to move very much, but you might find you might have some movement just on these edges here. So you just want to make sure that these corners are flat. And then just get one for your point here. So now what we're going to do is sew all the way around to about here. So we're going to leave that sort of sized gap open, and that's how we're going to pull our mask the right way. So we want to go on our machine. You want to make sure that you're on basic straight stitch here, and we're going to sew 1 centimeter from the edge, like I said, starting from this point. It's going to be a lot easier to close it up later. So if you position your fabric along the edge of this presser foot, that will be a centimetre seam allowance. Always make sure you do your reverse stitches as well. And stop, making sure that your needle is inside the fabric. Then you can lift your presser foot, and then you're not going to lose your position. As you can see now, we're getting to the point where we're going to be joining up with our original part here. So we want to make sure that we are only sewing to about here, so leaving about 5 centimeters seam opening. Once we get there, we do our reverse stitch. Really important to do a reverse stitch. If you don't, your seam might come open. So now we are ready to take all our pins out. And then what we want to do, because we've got these corners, we want to make sure that these don't turn too curved. So we just need to snip all of our corners like that, as close to the stitching as you can, but without cutting your stitching. And now we're going to open up our mask and just pull it through and push it And then you should be able to get your pieces of elastic and pull, and then start to flatten it a bit better. And what we want to do now is take it to the iron and then just press all of our seams open like this. So we just want to make sure that we've got it all perfect. So I'm going to take this to the iron. Now you've got your little opening here, so you just need to iron it the same seam allowance as the rest so that you still end up with your little point at the bottom. So just like this. So there we can see now that's where my opening was. Just want to iron it flat, and we're actually going to close that up at the last point using a very simple little invisible stitch. So we've got our little opening there. So now what we're going to do before we do that is we're going to get our little window. Don't know if you can see it very well on there. And then we're going to position it centrally on our mask. Now this can be a little bit tricky. So what I found out is the easiest thing. If you've got any bent pins like this, these are quite useful for keeping the film flat, because obviously the film is not going to be able to stretch as much as your fabric. So this one might be a little bit too bent actually. Just want to pop that in there. No, that one's too bent. This one's got a slight kink to it. So we just want to pin it about 1/2 centimetre from the edge of our film. And then you can see, now that's got a bit of a kink to it, so it's actually holding it in place a bit better. Making sure now that this is going to be equal. So we want it to be as symmetrical as possible. And we're just going to pop a pin on this side as well. And the holes that the pins make on the film will actually be covered because we're actually going to sew inside the film. We're not going to sew along the edge of the film. Just make sure that the film is going to stay there. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's basically what we've got. So now what we're going to do is go back to the sewing machine. We're going to change our stitch. So we're going to have a zigzag stitch, and we're going to have it a little wide. On this machine is the set in 2.5, and it's going to be very short. So what we end up with is a very small compact zigzag stitch, and that's usually called a satin stitch, and that's what we use for applique, which is basically what we're doing here. So we're going to applique this little film onto it. And what I'm going to do, you're probably not going to be able to see it very well until it's finished, but I'm going to sew about 1/2 centimetre in from the edge of this film. So I'm going to run my edge of my film just along this edge, not on the edge of the presser foot, just on this little dent. Lots of presser foots have these little markings. So we'll just have to experiment on your own machine, I guess. So I'm going to position my presser foot. I can now take that pin out, provided I don't move it. Start with a little stitch, then do my reverse stitching, and then we're going to go all the way around the edges. There we go. So now it's on the right side. That's where we want it to go, so that we have a really good angle on this corner, and then we can carry on. little satin stitch, which has just gone all the way around there, and that's the inside of it. So what we want to do now is we are going to try and remove this piece of fabric from this side. Now, if you've got some small embroidery scissors, like these are much better, but mine is so blunt because they're about 20 years old, so I'm going to have to use a large pair. What I want to do is just cut as close to my stitching as possible, like this, without cutting the actual stitches. And this technique is actually called reverse applique. Should look something like this. Now you can see all these pointy corners here, so we're just going to cut the excess off, but what we want to do is make sure that this plastic bit is on the outside of our mask. Okay, so just remember that, because there might still be a little corner remaining and we don't want that to catch our skin. So I'm just going to cut the same as what I did on the other side, just cutting off the plastic now all around the edge, but in the same way that we're going as close to our stitching as possible. Okay, and what I would do as well is just round off these little edges. So that's basically our mask, but what we need to do now to remember is to close up our little stitch. Now there's two things that you could do. You can either do a row of stitching all the way around if you want to, or what I'm going to do is do a simple slip stitch. So I've got my needle and thread. I put my two ends together. So you've got strong double thread here. Cut any excess off because you might end up seeing the little knots. Get your opening, open it up like this. Start off with a very small little tack stitch, one that doesn't come through the other side. And then before you pull the thread all the way through, you'll notice that you've got your loop here. Just put your needle through there, pull, and then that's your secure knot. And then you just want to do your slip stitch, and a slip stitch is where you basically do a stitch in and out on one side at a time and then jump over to the other side, etc. So here's my little stitch. Then I'm going to jump over to the other side and do a little stitch. Just make sure that where you come out from one side, it's parallel with where you go in on the other side. And now we're going to just do a couple of little loop knots. So if you can open this up slightly just so we can conceal your knot, just do a little stitch, and then if you notice this big loop here, this is there where we're going to pop our needle through, and then that will give you a secure knot. So I like to do that twice, and there you have it. So now we are going to just put our thread there. And you can re-iron it if you want to, but when you iron this, remember you do have plastic here, so you need to have a very low setting and preferably some greaseproof paper or something like that. So there is our mask. What we found that is a bit of a problem with masks with plastic like this is that sometimes the screen can actually fog up. So what people have suggested is you can just wipe some soap or some shower gel, washing up liquid onto here, and apparently it just stops it from fogging. I haven't tried these in winter, but in the summer they don't actually mist up that much anyway. So there's our mask, and there's some that I made earlier as well.